Shalom, welcome to another Midrash with After's Heart Ministries. Today we are going to be discussing Noach. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about Midrash. So a couple things. Last week I mentioned that Midrash was kind of like a speculation, like we're seeking something that's not found or not there. And we are basically we are finding our way through the Torah in a way that is not your ordinary biblical interpretation process. In other words, we are taking science and philosophy and ancient things, lifestyles, language, pictographs, etc., and bringing them all together. But I wanted to talk a minute about the original Midrash Rabbah. And you'll notice that I titled it actually this today and said it was 2.0. So the original Midrash Rabbah was with a bunch of sages who were basically kind of stating what the lore of or the legends of the patriarchs and things like that were, and why some of the things they did what they did. Midrash Rabbah was basically something to kind of bring all of the lore into connection with the already written down fact or the documents or records of the wars of the Jews, etc., etc. Okay, so in that sense, what I am claiming is that we have a bunch of sages in this congregation. Now, I know that's a tall order, so I'm just going to bring something up really quick. When Yeshua was here, and after he had died and had resurrected from the dead, he went to Galilee with his disciples, with the 12, and they met him there, and he made a statement to them that I think is really, really important. Yeshua says, "All power has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go ye forth, making disciples." Now, before we get too much caught up in the context of disciple, because there's a number of things that you need to know about that, let's just go with the idea of what is the reason why he'd say, "All power has been given to me in heaven and on earth, therefore go ye forth, making disciples." Let me explain. There were disciples who were there were disciples of different sects of Judaism. So a sect is still Judaism. And I think that's really, really important here. And if you really need to understand Judaism, you need to understand what the remnant of the tribe of Judah constructed as a religion after the return from the Babylonian exile is the Judaism of Yeshua's time. So it's really important for you to understand that you can't call a feast day like the Feast of Tabernacles, and really we needn't necessarily call it a feast, but an appointed time of tabernacles as a Jewish feast. It's not. Purim is a Jewish feast. Why? The rest of Israel did not know it. Before the Israeli exile and the Judean exile, there was no such thing as Purim. Same thing with Hanukkah. Hanukkah is absolutely a Jewish feast, but Tabernacles is not. It's the feast of Yahweh and was given instruction specifically to Israel. Now, a couple of things that are really important here. All power in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go ye forth, making disciples. We had all these different sects of Judaism, and within those sects, there were people making disciples. So what was the difference between these specific individuals, the 12, right? The chosen, going forth, making disciples, as opposed to, say, Rabbi Akiva, who, had students all the way up until the destruction of the Second Temple. Even Rabbi Shammai during Yeshua's time had disciples. In fact, Yeshua had a lot to say about those disciples, that Shammai was making them into criminals. And why did he say that? Because of what happened with Hillel, right? What happened with the disciples of Hillel. Oh, there's that word disciple again. You see, here's the issue. We don't understand why Yeshua said, all power has been given to me in heaven and on earth, therefore go ye forth. So in that light, I want you to understand that you're probably just a little bit more valuable, a little bit more educated, and a little bit more authoritative than you think you are if you have been with this community. And if you have been given revelation of Torah outside of this community. So in that whole system, it is important for you to understand we're working with a very different kind of disciple here. And so as we have this Midrash Rabbah, I want you to think yourself just a bit more superior than Rabbi Akiva's disciples. And Rabbi Akiva wrote Pirkei Avot. He wrote the Ethics of the Fathers, as did some other sages, including Gamliel. But the point is that there is absolutely an authoritative element to the people who have been studying and learning these things. And so as you Midrash today, and if you post questions in the Midrash channel on Slack, or if you post questions on YouTube while you're watching this live, do it with an understanding that you're a very different kind of disciple. Okay? All right. I gave my spiel. Let's go ahead and we can jump into the Midrash. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with the questions that were posted to Slack, Slack being the network that has all of our ministry participants on it. So anybody who is a ministry participant is in Slack, and they will declare, and they have posted questions there. And we will go ahead and work through those answers. Okay, what's the first question?
First question, quote, Noah walked with God.
Oh, by the way, this is Deborah. Hi. And she is the better half of my soul. And her Hebrew name is Zohara. Go ahead.
So the first question is posted. Noah walked with God. Does it, this is in quotes, Noah walked with God. Does it literally translate as with powers, walked, lived, went Noah? That's the first question.
Okay, so let's pause for just one moment. Sorry, we're gonna I just realized there's a piece of equipment missing. I'm gonna go grab it. Okay, so originally what I was going to do is share this other tablet, but it's having a hard time getting itself connected. So we will continue as is. But I just my fingers and hands are going to be in front of the camera a little bit when I'm trying to share this screen. So we're just going to go ahead and go into the text, and then we'll ask the question again and discuss what we're talking about here. So let's see. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 6, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And very specifically where?
That's a good question. I believe it's chapter 6, verse 9. So the very first chapter of the whole Torah portion.
Okay. Chapter 6, verse 9. A little bit clunky today. Okay. So verse 9 says, "This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God."
So that last portion there, he walked with God.
Okay. So of course this is the NLT version right here, right? And so that's one of the things that we need to kind of keep in mind, is that there is kind of a they're interpreting the idioms for us, and not all of those are accurate. So let's go into the Hebrew really quick here. So first of all, toldot is generations or birthings, okay? And then Noach is written twice, which is different, you know. And here it says he was a righteous man. Ish Sadat Sadiq. So of course we know that righteousness is an equal distribution of wealth, and we know that he took care of the poor, and we know that he equally distributed justice as well, because a righteous man is also someone who is going to be just, even though that he's not a judge. Okay, and then the next part, the Tamim, he was clean in all his generations, and Elohim hit halach Noach. So here is a very, very important thing. This is the Heath Pa'el conjugation. We better take a break from the screen share for a moment and discuss Heath Pa'el. So a couple of things that are relevant, okay? First of all, the grammar in the Hebrew that has survived through the ages has it has regular tense conjugations, as in incompleted actions, completed actions, and now ongoing actions, infinitives, and participles. But it also has what all of those in the causative. So now we have caused incomplete actions and caused complete actions, caused now moment actions, and then we have caused infinitive and participle. Okay. Now, where this becomes important is the last conjugation, which is basically, I believe it is, so I think there's 15 conjugations altogether. It's 14 regular, and then that 15th one is called the reflexive. Okay. So first and foremost, generally speaking, when you learn Hebrew, they use the Hebrew adopted root katal because it doesn't contain any weak, what we call weak letters. For example, the yod and the vav cause certain things to happen to a word that make it even more complicated. So when you're learning Hebrew and you're seeking to understand Hebrew, it is important to understand that you want to use a three-letter radical that is adopted and does not contain a yod, a vav, a hey, an aleph, or a doubled last letter. Those get special treatments. Those special treatments, the Hebrew grammar world calls weak letters. Okay, but the word katal, kaf, tet, lamed, is very, very straightforward. So if I say katal in general, it is he killed. All right. And it's not he caused to die, he actually killed. Thou shalt not kill, right? Okay. So then, and I don't know if katal is the word used there in that commandment, but you get my point that kill is a very intentional process. Then the second one is the intensive, which is katal. Katal is, instead of he killed, he murdered, right? Okay. Or he destroyed could be another way to put it. Then we have yiktol. Yiktol. Yiktol is he will kill. That we're adding a yod to it. So you can see now how adding letters to the grammar actually creates more of a what's the word I'm thinking of here, of a complex interpretation of the pictographs, but also it starts to complicate the word in terms of what we call parsing. So parsing is about taking a Hebrew word, looking at it in the Hebrew, and dropping out the extra pieces, the suffixes, the infixes, and the prefixes. So as you begin to build a Hebrew word in a conjugation, it starts to become more and more complicated. And I'm going to explain that here in a minute. So why is this important? Because now you can understand that certain added letters create a nuanced version of that same word as a word. In fact, you can make an entire statement out of a single word. For example, my Hebrew name, Kinatavnu, it's all one word, but it's actually a conjugated it's a conjugated word that means to build, and a conjugated word that means to have zeal. And so the entire Kinatavnu is with zeal, I will build us. Okay. And so one side is zeal in a conjugated form of what we call a construct, or of zeal. And the other part is in the first person incompleted action. So avenu means I will build us, and kinat means with zeal or of zeal. Okay, so of zeal I will build us is all one whole word, but it's a whole phrase in English. So the reason this is important is because when we are working with a concept of when we're working with a concept of conjugation, the word changes. And so the Heath Palel, okay, so the Palel part is actually coming from the Hebrew word pu'al, which means verb, means action, okay? And so Heath Palel gives us Heath Pa'el gives us an idea of what's going to be happening to the word. So the best way I think to do this would be to go ahead and screen share and go to freeform and start to kind of describe these things on the screen. Can you grab me my Apple Pencil out of my case, please? So in principle, we're going to go to freeform. And so the way that we want to look at this, let me see if I can get a good thick line here. That'll do. Okay. So for example, if we're to use Katal, okay, Kof, Tet, Lamed, okay, that's Katal. If I was to say, and so then this is going to be he killed. Okay. And like I said, this is the standard. I know that probably unaliving could make people uncomfortable and possibly violate community guidelines, but hopefully it's considered educational and therefore it won't be. But the premise is that this is an uncomfortable word, but this is a very effective teaching tool because it doesn't have any special nuances to it. It's just straightforward grammar. So if I say, if I put the word here, whoops, sorry, it is really hard to draw on a flat screen with an Apple Pencil when it's all slippery from the screen protector. Okay, if I put a yod here, then this is he will kill. Okay, so you can see how this could be very important because we know the yod is a special kind of pictograph. We know the kof, the tet, and the lamed are special kind of pictographs. But this is actual Hebrew grammar in operation. So next we have, let's go ahead and we'll start a new one here. The next thing that we need to get into is these special conjugation cases. For example, if I have what we call the whole field. Whoops, I wanted that to be in black. In black. So this is what we call the hifil. Okay. So in this case, what's going to happen is a hay is going to be placed on the front of it. For example, if we're going to use the hifil, then we would say, we'll put the kof in here. There's a tet, a yod, and then a lamed, and then a hay. So this is pronounced hiktil. Hiktil is he caused to kill. Okay. So hiktil now has what we call a causative. So if there is a hofil conjugation, then that actually changes it to a causative. We don't have an equivalent of that in English. We don't. So in Hebrew, you can add these. Notice here, let me go ahead and highlight these in yellow. You have the yod and you have the hay. So we have a prefix and an infix causing the conjugation. Now, we could get into all kinds of mystical stuff about why these are being applied to these words in the way that they are, because causative has to do with cause and not effect, right? But I showed you all of that to show you this, okay? Because when we go back into the Hebrew here in a minute, you're going to see something amazing. So then the next one is called Keith Pa'el. Okay, Heath Pa'el. So if we have the Hebrew root pa, let's see, okay, so pa ale, pei ayin lamed, and we put a hey, which is the observer, and the tet, a covenant next, I'm sorry, the tav, a covenant next to it. Let's see, do I add a yod? I think there is a yod here. So let me go ahead and fix that. I'm pretty sure there's a yod here. Guys, it's been a long time since I've messed with the grammar to this depth, but I think there's a yod here. So I'm going to go ahead and put it for now. Yep. Okay. This is a very, very, very interesting conjugation. This is the 15th conjugation of a Hebrew word. So this is Heath Pa'el. So if we were to say Heath Katal, wait, I missed the tet here. Heath Katal, then this, let's see, I think it's actually Heath Katal. Yeah, let's actually, you know what, let's just leave it like this with the yod in there. I could be wrong about the yod, but let's just leave it in there for now. But what I want you to see is now this whole thing is actually a phrase. He killed himself. Okay. That is actually the concept there. Heath Katil, right? So that is how we say, and what we call this is the reflexive. Okay. This is the reflexive because it's being done upon itself. Okay. Now, if we were to put a noon and no, not a noon, just a vav here. So it'd be Heath Katalu, and I'll spell it out for you. Heath Katalu. That is they killed themselves. Okay. So let's talk a minute about this. You now know that in the Hebrew, there is a couple conjugations that are not in the English that can cause a very unique translation to that whole system. Okay. So the way that I want you to think about this is if we were to look at this in the Hebrew, exactly how it's spelled, we know that there's this 15th conjugation called the reflexive. And if it's plural or if it's second person, it has to do with doing it to each other or doing it upon each other. If it's singular and it's in the third, or I mean in the first person, then it is I'm doing it to myself. Or if it's in the third person, they, he, she, it is doing it to themselves. Okay. So that's going to become very important here in a minute. So if we go into we go back into this and we see this is in the Heath Pa'el. So what do we know? That it is reflexive. Look at this. It is third person masculine singular, which means what? Elohim walked with himself, Noah. Look again now. Let's talk about this. Let's work through this. So Hithpael is reflexive, means it's being done crisscross to the other or the other to you, right? But if it is in third person or it is in first person, then it is being done upon itself or upon myself. Okay. And so perfect means what? It's completed. Third person, he, she, it, right? Masculine, he, singular, he, not they. So he walked with himself. Now, one other nuance we need to get into, and that is important, and it doesn't actually say walked with himself, it's he walked himself. Okay. There's one more nuance we need to get into, and that is actually one that I have taught a lot about in this congregation, and that is when we have what is called the SVO or the SOV. Or no, wait. That's not right. So in English, we do subject, object, verb, but in Hebrew, we do verb, subject, object. Okay. So let me explain a little bit about what I mean here. So in the SVO system, I'm sorry, SOV system, we have the person who is, actually, I got this mixed up too. Hold on one second. Sorry. All that needs to be changed here, that's why I kept saying SVO, is because my brain already knows this is correct. I just wrote it wrong. In the SVO system, it is the subject doing the verb upon the object. In the VSO system, it is the verb being done by the subject to the object. Oftentimes, it's possible for the object to be on the outside. So it'll go subject, verb, it'll go object, verb, subject. So let's talk a minute about this confusion, because I'm sure by now it's very confusing. Let me give you something to grasp a hold of. So if I have in English, if I have a ball, I am going to throw the ball. So I am the subject, throw is the verb, the ball is the object. Subject, I. Verb, throw. Object, ball. I throw ball. In Hebrew, as a nuance that is primarily found in Aramaic, which is where we have to end up being a little bit careful about this, is we find that it actually will be the verb stated, the subject, and then, so it would be throw the ball, throw I the ball. Okay. So whereas in English, I throw the ball, in Hebrew, we talk like Yoda. Throw I the ball. Okay. And so in that way, the conjugation in the verb itself, in other words, where we add prefixes, infixes, and suffixes, actually is what causes us to be in a state of doing the thing in terms of if it is third person, he, she, it, they, third person plural, they or them or those men or those women, depending on the conjugation, or it can be second person, you, or second person plural, you all, or it can be first person singular, I, or first person singular or first person plural, we. all within the suffixes and infixes of the word itself. Not like in English where we have all these helping verbs and all these pronouns and all that kind of stuff. The pronouns, the tenses, the mood, everything is contained in the actual conjugation of the verb. So where we get into the mess is where we get into trying to say that it's going verb, subject, but then there's no object listed, but the object is at the front. So the way that this is interpreted in the English, I can go read it right off of this tablet here in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, is Noah walked with God. Now, there are three very important things that are missing from this to make it Noah walked with God. Number one is the fact that there is no with anywhere in this. Okay. Second of all, the verb is being done to himself. So there's two ways we could do this. We could either go the subject, verb, object, or we could go verb, subject, object. So let's start with the normal standard of Hebrew interpretation that we get from like JPS Tanakh, that we get from Art Scroll, right? Where they are going to say the exact same thing. If I go pull up a Chumash right now off the shelf, it's probably going to say Noah walked with God. But in the Hebrew, it doesn't say that. In the Hebrew, whoever's doing the walking, because again, we have that subject, verb, object versus verb, subject, object issue, is it's being done to itself. It is walking with or as a function of itself. So if we accept, let's go into the Hebrew here really quick. Let me pull it up for you real quick. In the blue letter under the Westminster Leningrad Codex. And specifically what we are looking at is this particular set of stuff, right? And what's really intriguing is we have an et here. Okay, that's going to be important that we probably need to take into consideration, because a lot of people are going to interpret this as with God, Noah walked. Okay, but the problem is the reflexive changes the entire circumstances in this sense right there. That reflexive, Heath Halech, okay. So sometimes in Hebrew, the object, in order to show emphasis, is placed on the outside of the conjugation, okay? And in this case, we could look at this in one of two ways. First of all, sometimes very mistakenly, Aleph Tav is interpreted with, okay? And I will show you something real quick just to kind of be objective and transparent. When we see, for example, in Genesis chapter 1, we see Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay? We see that there. You see that the et here has what? The what we call the tsere. The tsere is a sound, A-Y, okay? Whereas in this other verse, we have it with what we call a seghol, which is the three dots underneath. which means what? Which means we could have an issue here. However, and this is important, let me just discuss this with you guys really quick. I often bring up the issue of translational bias. And I say that if I was to translate the Hebrew into English or the Greek back to the Hebrew, I would be very biased to add messianic language because I believe it has been removed by the Jewish Publication Society. I believe that translations of words avoid the salvation issue, right? Whereas in, say, the Septuagint, we see translational bias towards the Gentiles. The Jews didn't like the Gentiles, so they did not put the oracles of God within the Greek translation of the Septuagint. They did not offer any mysticism in the speech of the Greek. In other words, you lose everything to translation if you are not in the Hebrew. And so then now that becomes what? The absolute dependent translational Old Testament document, right? So where is all this going? Well, first of all, it's important for you to understand that there are translational bias. I can prove it. For example, in the JPS Tanakh, it is openly known that the scribes altered the conjugation of the original Torah. They know this. This is one of the laws, or what we call the emendations of the scribes, where it appears Abraham is equal with Yahweh in Genesis 19. So they change the conjugation so that it wouldn't appear that way. The reason I bring this up is because what I want to say here is there were no vowel points in the original Hebrew manuscripts, and we cannot necessarily depend on the Mazors to be non-biased. Why? Because it could actually read here, the Elohim walked himself, Noah. Okay, that's how it could read. But because they put that seg hole in there, that the three little dots underneath et, Aleph, Tav. You see, in the book of Revelation, we hear this Alpha and Omega. I got news for you. No respectful Jew has no clue what the Alpha and Omega is, but they know what the Aleph Tav is. So if it was I am the Aleph Tav, they would be like mind blown. He's the definite direct object of every single verb in Hebrew, right? I am the definite object marker. Okay, but that's a little side tidbit I don't need to get into.
Which means he is the Torah, right? Because if all of Hebrew is written in the verb and the Aleph Tav is the definite object,
right,
then he is absolutely the Torah.
Right. And not only that, but we have actually...
It would blow anybody's mind.
Right. We have the middle letter Mem. Aleph, Mem, Tav is the whole of the Aleph Bet, the alphabet of the Hebrew. Aleph, Mem, Tav. Do you know what Aleph, Mem, Tav spells? Truth. I am the way, the truth, right? Hadarek, Ha'emet, Ha'chaim, or Ha'chaya, right? And so I am the way, the truth, and life. So it is really, really important here that in this whole process, you realize that sometimes the scribes would tweak the text to reflect something where they felt it was inappropriate for a person to be interacting with God that way, which is translational doctrinal bias.
Just like we see the bias of Christianity and saying we're not gods, don't believe in that gods, but our Messiah said, is not the scripture fulfilled?
Right. And partially the reason for that is because when the Jews translated the Septuagint, in the Septuagint, it says judges, not Elohim. Just like in Psalm chapter 8, where it says, we have been made tachat, under Elohim. We've been made a lesser Elohim. But in the Septuagint, it says we've been made a little lower than the angels. They took the mystery, they took the mysticism out. They didn't want the Gentiles messing with that stuff. And maybe for good reason. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But what I can tell you is this: that can read, Elohim walked himself, Noah. In other words, Noah was an Elohim, and Elohim is walking himself, and that happens to be Noah, which makes sense. And I'm going to tell you why. Noah is called a Siddiq. But what I want you to think about is, what is the definition of Siddiq? What is the definition of blameless? Right? Let me look at that Hebrew word blameless for a minute. That's tamim, right? Tamim. Yeah, tamim. So now we can tie this together beautifully. Okay? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Right? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. The righteousness, the only definition, the only definable, acceptable identity of righteousness has to be assigned to the merit of Yeshua and him not knowing sin and becoming sin. This is something that is foreign to the anti-missionary rabbis. They can't handle it. They can't stand it. They want to disprove it. But it is all over Torah. Man, I'd love for Morty to pick up on this one and contradict me. I just want to see what he have to say. But the premise is that basically what we're working with here is an idea of Romans chapter 8, verse 3 and 4. Let me read it to you. I won't share it with you on the screen. I'm just going to read it to you. So listen to these words. And if you're not a listening learner, just concentrate on the visuals of what it could mean. Okay? Reading out of the New King James, because that's so I'm going to share with you one of the things that happens. I memorized the entire book of Romans all the way to to chapter 13 in the New King James version of the Bible. And so as a result of that, I have to read it in that, because I will start reading in the NASB or some other version, and I will end up quoting what's in my memory instead of what's on the page. So we'll go with that. For what the law, what Torah could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. What do we know the flesh to be? What is the flesh? The flesh is the ego. The flesh is not the skin, not the bones, not the heart that beats, right? It is the ego. And what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did. So what the Torah could not do, in that it was weak in the ego, Elohim, what's that? The powers did by sending his own son, that which is trained to bear the inheritance in the likeness, that's in the blood of sinful flesh. Of what? Sinful ego. On account, sinful, Torahlessness. Let's add that in there. In the likeness of a Torahless ego, on account of the ego, he condemned the ego, or he condemned the lawlessness or the Torahlessness in the ego. No break there. That the righteous requirement, the diatheke of the Torah, might be brought to a greater extremity in us who do not walk. Oh, there's that word walk, which we'll get to, according to the ego, but according to the spirit, which is the word pneuma, which is again a Septuagint manipulation of the word ruach. So how it should be reading is not according to the ego, but according to the flowing path. Hadarek, I am the way, Hadarek, the path, the emet, truth, the chaya, life. Chaye, sorry. Okay, and so in principle, what we're working with here is a documentational proof that Noah was caused to be in a state of Elohimship through walking. But it was the Elohim in him that was walking. The Elohim did by sending his own son. It didn't even say did. What it says, the Elohim by sending his own trained inheritor in the blood of Torahlessness, right? What's the blood of Torahlessness? His humanity, his capability of sinning. Because remember, the bride who he had to become, right? He had to become the bride for the moment of his existence as a human, because that means he's a vessel of reception like the rest of us, and has to become unstable, right? Tempted. But how does he stabilize? By not sinning. He becomes tempted, but he never performs the act. He thereby eliminates or he stabilizes the vessel. Meaning what? And this is important. Meaning that the Elohim sending his inheritance, right? His trained inheritor. He's the one being groomed to receive the bestowal. Oh man, you guys, I'm telling you, you're so caught up. You're so caught up on the Son of God being some third person of the Trinity or something outside the realm of what we are. You miss the idea and the fact that he was sent in the blood of Torahless ego. He had to be acquainted with our grief. Think about this now. He's tempted in all points of Torah, but sins not, does not actually violate Torah, right? Thereby condemning it, condemning Torahlessness. In what? In the ego. Through what? Ego death. Perhaps maybe even the words, which I don't necessarily believe he said, but we'll just go with for a moment. Let this cup pass from me. Not my will, but your will be done. The ego death. So that what? The higher self, the Elohim, could actually what? Bring Torah to a greater extremity within us. Noah is made to walk in the Torah that's been written on his heart because retroactively Yeshua caused all men to have Torah written on their heart from the beginning to the end, because he is the lamb slain from the foundations of the earth, whatever that means, because we know that's symbolic and that there's energies involved. But then, intriguing, we have this concept that Noah was blameless, that he was righteous. We know that there's only one way to define righteousness. You see it right here, and he made him who knew no sin. We see it right here in that he was in the blood of Torahless ego, but did not sin, did not commit Torahlessness, was a Shomer Torah even to the death, which the writer of Hebrews challenges we've never done. We've never done. So that gets us through the reflexive, where we could see an Elohim walking itself so that Noah is blameless. Almost as if this is actually how Noah was blameless. Right? What's my point? If we walk according to the flow, if we jump in the river and let it take us, then and only then will we be the man outside, the ruach, the resh chet, man outside the wall of the tent, doing what? Taming the animals, taming the ego, cultivating the crops, cultivating that which grows, the future self, right? And checking the condition of the camp outside the tent. Those are the reasons to be outside the tent. Provision, protection, and instruction is what is in the tent. Provision and protection and instruction coming from the middle pole of the tent, while the exterior of the tent is held together by the bone glue or the ima. The ima is holding it or surrounding the middle pole, surrounding the supportive pole, the av or the abba. And then, of course, the ben being what? The tent continuing, which was the new panels being glued to the tent as it aged. Mind blown. If that doesn't get you guys' blood going, I don't know what will. That should get you so excited. It should get you overwhelmingly just blown away by the level of Hebraic reality in a Greek written or a Greek translated letter. We took the English and Greek nuances out, put the Hebrew back, and here we are with Noah walking with himself. Okay? All right, so now let's talk about halak. Okay? Halakha, because that's the second part. Go ahead and read your question one more time, please.
Okay, give me a second. Noah walked with God. Does it literally translate with powers walked went Noah?
Very, very close to that, right? We've identified that. There's a question about halakha, right?
Oh, that was a separate
question. Oh, that's a separate question. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead. So that first part, that reflexive, is him doing it to himself, him walking himself. So there's a number of ways that we could get into that. The first one is that obviously, if we look at the concept, and if you continue through Romans 8, you'll find that everything that makes us who we are is this higher self, and everything that destroys who we are is this ego or lower self, or the Hasatan, which is the corporate collective ego, right? The adversary which would stand in direct interference with the path. Let me explain it to you. The word Hasatan, in fact, let me go ahead and illustrate it for you. So the word Hasatan itself, where we get the word Satan, okay, is a very, very inappropriate thing to capitalize it. It is not a name. Okay? It is not a title. It is a verb. Okay? And let me explain how the verb works. The verb is as follows. Samek. tet, final noon. However, in the modern Hebrew, it is sin tet, final noon. Okay. But in the original pictographic Hebrew, which would have been during David's time, Moshe's time, of course, it would be an evolved version of during David's time, but still the same. It would still have that Paleo Hebrew look to it. In the original pictographic Hebrew, it's going to be a thorn, okay? The top of a container and a seed sprout, okay? So, first of all, need to understand what these represent. Let's write it in blue. So this is a thorn. Oops. This is a thorn, and it means to catch. Okay. This is the top of a container or a pot or a basket, and it means round or to turn. And then this always is the word continue. So I have found, and I talked to Jeff Benner about this a little bit, that a lot of times if you drop the letters that would occur in the prefixes or suffixes, for example, in this case, that bad boy right there, which is the noon, you get the parent root. So what does the actual parent root say? Catch, to turn. So what are we getting at here? The word Satan, we drop the noon. So it's just sat, right? Sat. What is sat? It is a thorn that causes a turning, right? So what is this thorn that's causing a turning? Oh, now we get back to this path, right? This ruach, this prescribed path. Remember, the ruach does not mean wind. The word ruach means man outside following a prescribed path. So, intriguingly enough, the word ruach itself is going to then contain a concept of a path. The word satan or satz, sin, tet, the thorn that catches and causes the turning off the path. If you've been ever hiking in an area that is not a maintained trail, there will be times when you encounter wild roses or you encounter a Russian olive or a number of other bushes that are so tangled in a path that you can't pass through it and you have to go around it. That is the adversary. That is the Hasatan. That is the corporate collective ego. That is the self ego. And so now you know that is the part that what? Yeshua condemned as being the source of Torah-lessness. What's Torah? From the root word yara, the throwing of the finger, the throwing of the hand of man. Yod Resh, hand of man. Torah is the throwing of the finger, the giving of instruction to go down a certain direction, and now we're back to the path. I am the darek, hadarek, the way. I am the way. What is the first sect of Judaism that eventually became the Christian dereliction? The way. Why would they call it the way? It's the ruach. It is the path, the prescribed path of man outside the tent, commissioned, not outside the tent because he's naked, ashamed, and cast out, but outside the tent because he's taming the animals and cultivating the growth, taming the egos, taming the corporate collective ego. Go ahead.
No.
Oh,
okay. In my seat.
Okay. So
being excited, I guess.
So the premise then is when it says that Noah walked himself, or Elohim walked himself, right? And Noah was who that was. However you spin it, whether it's Noah walking himself or Elohim walking himself, and that is Noah, both of them make sense. Because if it's Noah walking himself, then he is relying upon something greater than himself. I'm sorry, greater than his ego to cause him to become blameless and righteous. But if it's Elohim, then we are openly admitting that the powers are Noah. And this is going to make sense later on in this discussion, potentially. So we can talk about the halakha in the next question. We can talk about walking in the next question. But I want to see if anybody in the congregation wants to bring something up, because I know I've been talking for a while and this is supposed to be a midrash. So let's see if there's any comments, any commentary from the other sages. I know there's rabbis rolling over in their grave because I'm calling you guys sages. Anything on YouTube?
Not that I see. No.
Okay. All right. So then let's take a brief break and we'll jump to the next question. All right. Well, let's go ahead and so we have discussed the reflexive verbiage of the last little phrase in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. Now, I think the next question on our list has something to do with the walking part. So we addressed that whole idea that Elohim kind of walked himself, or Noah walked himself, Elohim. However, we work it out, Elohim is the object here, not the subject, because of that Aleph Tav. So, whereas if we're using the verb subject object, Noah, or walked himself Noah, Elohim. Or we could flip it around and say walked himself Elohim Noah. Either way, the object and the subject are the same thing because of the reflexive. Okay. Okay. So now we'll move on to the next question.
Okay, the next question was the earth corrupt and filled with violence because it was being obedient to all flesh who desired violence and corruption on each other?
That's deep. Okay. So let's see, how are we going to address this? I think what we're going to go ahead and do is, let me go ahead and share the screen here. Okay. And we will go into the Blue Letter Bible. And what we are looking at is going to be the part, I believe, where it says,
It's coming from Genesis 6, verse 11.
Verse 11. Okay. The earth was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with violence. Let's jump into the Hebrew here.
Let's go into 12 as well.
Okay, 12 as well. So 12 is, so God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. Okay. This is actually going to get into some really interesting areas where we start to talk about energies and matter, mass, etc. Okay. First and foremost, let's address a very, very specific issue. Let's stop this for a minute and talk about this. When I'm going to tell you, first of all, if you are a new Christian watching this channel, when I harp on Christians, I'm talking about the leadership, but I'm also talking about you as not knowing for yourself, but parroting and repeating. Now, the reason why this is important and this is relevant is because I don't want you to get discouraged by me getting at a person because they're a Christian. I want you to think more that it's a challenge for you to do the right thing and challenge the status quo. Because you were told, most likely, most Christians in most circumstances of evangelism recommend to their converts. So now let's say that you're outside a bar passing out tracts, and somebody responds and they want to hear the message. And so you start giving them the message. They say the sinner's prayer and accept Jesus into their heart. Now they're saved from hell, etc., etc. And what do? You say, now go read the book of John. And I can tell you, one of the worst things you could do is have a Christian go read the book of John. And I'm going to tell you why. The book of John is probably one of the most esoteric books in the entirety of Scripture. More esoteric than the book of Revelation, which everybody blows out of proportion as this big deal. Okay? Book of Revelation is no different from any other writings of a prophet. But the book of John, Yeshua speaks words that no one can handle. Not on this realm, not in this reality or day and age. Maybe an ancient Hebrew like Abraham could handle the wisdom that Yeshua communicated in that book. The book of John is very esoteric, and one of the most esoteric things in the book of John is the story of the woman at the well. So first of all, there's a couple things that we need to know. There's a couple pieces of history that are important. The first part of history is that the Israeli or the Northern Kingdom exile done by the Assyrian Empire created a gap in which there were no people in the Northern Kingdom of the land of Israel. The Jews, Judea, which was Judah, Benjamin, and some of the tribe of Levi, did not go into the Northern Kingdom. They stayed in the Southern Kingdom. There was safety in being near Jerusalem, near the king, near the temple. It was not safe to be in the Northern Kingdom because the Assyrian king brought from Elam a group of people who were not covenanted with Yahweh as Israelites to the land, to work the land, to send him tribute. They get to the land, and all of a sudden the land starts working them. It starts attacking them, wild beasts, hornets, right? Disease, the weather, nothing can go right. So they send a delegation back to Assyria, say, hey, we don't know what you did here, but this is a cursed land. And so then he goes to his advisors. They say, go get a priest who knows how to worship that God and bring him back to that land and have him teach them how to worship the God. You want to know why the Samaritans to this day sacrifice goats on Mount Gerizim? Because that's what they were taught on how to make the land stop attacking them. So Samaritans keep Torah, right? Samaritans keep Torah. How? Through the instruction of a priest. Now, why is this important? Because now this woman says, hey, we are ancestors of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And we are in the land by birthright. And of course, they lay claim to the sons of Keturah, right? Which was Abraham's third wife. But here's the part that's important with this. In this Samaritan context, she says, our fathers worshipped on this hill. You Jews worship in Jerusalem. Which is it? Yeshua's like, you got it all messed up. You don't understand. None of this material stuff is real. You don't understand. The part about worship has nothing to do with the location, has nothing to do with the material realm, has nothing to do with mass. Because Yahweh, right? The Lord, I believe it's Kurios there. Let me look real quick. John, let me jump into John real quick here. In verse 21, Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, verse 23, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father is seeking such worship in him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And I'm just going to throw out there one thing here. In the Hebrew, theos is not translated the Lord. theos is translated Elohim. Okay? So Elohim is spirit. If Psalm chapter 82 says we are all Elohim, then here's the intrigue. Elohim is spirit. The higher self is spirit. What enabled Noah to walk is spirit. So now the question is, when, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen here, when we look at Noah, the Parasha Noah, and we see in a number of places in the Parasha Noah, the intensification of all power in the universe, stuffing itself into something that can come and look at what's going on. Going into verse 12. So God looked. So my question to you is how does a thing that is spirit, maybe we should talk about the word spirit really quick, because I can tell you the word pneuma in the Greek is not a good plan. Not a good plan, okay? It is not a good way to think about Yahweh. It is not a good way to think about your spirit. In fact, the word spirit itself, unfortunately, is a disservice. The word spirit means ghost in the Old English. Ghost, as in a disembodied energy. Disembodied, as in dead or something else. Disconnected. But either way, it does not reference the reality of what the word ruach means. But let's say that we go with the concept that what they were really trying to say with the word air, right? Pneuma is breath, right? Or place of the winds. Okay. So in principle, then, where I really want you to focus is on the idea that this word looked upon requires a human being to examine it. So what Elohim, it doesn't say the Lord God here. It doesn't say, there's nowhere in any of this verse do you see from this point here, from that point there to that point there, do you ever see the name Yahweh? So when Elohim looked upon the earth, right? And behold, right? It was corrupt. Shachat. What does shachat mean in the Hebrew? To destroy, corrupt, to go to ruin or decay. In the nifal, to be marred or spoiled, to be rotten. Okay? So let's take this back to agricultural concepts. Because remember, we're dealing with agriculture here, right? We're dealing with animal husbandry. We're dealing with horticulture. We're dealing with almanac seasons, right? We're dealing with cycles. We're not dealing with we're not dealing with the normal things that you would think about when it comes to this. So when we talk about something looked, we have three options to consider. Option number one, an Elohim that is a human being is the one who actually looked. But what if it said Lord God? What if it said Yahweh Elohim looked? What can we say? Can we say that he stuffed himself into a human being for a moment and looked? Because he does not have eyes. And the context of sight, which consequently we may end up touching upon today if we talk about the rainbow. The concept of sight is a human science. It is a animal science. It is not a deity science. Deities don't have eyes, contrary to popular belief. There's no cat sitting up in some ivory throne, rocking some bad to the bone beard, better than mine, and looking down in some direction. God knows what. I mean, guys, can we stop with the anthropomorphisms here? Option number one is that he stuffed himself into a human. Option number two is that it was a human in an enlightened state, like a prophet.
Or even Noah himself.
Thank you. I was getting there. And I will bring that to fruition here in a minute. But then there is a premise. There is an element here where that energy focuses or becomes attracted to the senseless violence. Think on that for a minute. In fact, does anybody want to speculate or midrash that a little bit? What do you all think that it could have been? God stuffing himself into a human like an avatar, or a human in a higher state, or an energy drawn, or its focus or its attraction occurring, or maybe all three. Who knows? Maybe an enlightened human is an avatar. I don't know. But isn't that some really amazing stuff? Get rid of the anthropomorphisms, and all of a sudden we have some deep mystical stuff going on. Thoughts? Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, I'll get in on it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think as I've been listening and thinking about this, as you said it and everything, it seems that perhaps, the Elohim is I don't know, maybe it's the light or whatever that we are connected to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so when we become the stable vessel and we are, our soul, our higher soul connects. Maybe that's what the higher soul connects to, is the Elohim. And then that gives, the power and everything. So as I read this and everything, it seems that what it's saying, that Noah walked, with Elohim, or Elohim walked with Noah, that he was in such a practice of that they weren't separate in that sense. And then that takes me back to Enoch and kind of the same thing, right? He was so connected to highest self, Elohim, this light or whatever, that then he was no more or whatever, right? He ascended, perhaps.
Oh, Enoch, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So then Noah, yeah, I mean, he learned from who? Probably from Enoch, probably from Methuselah.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to touch on that for sure. And
Yeah.
we need to. So one of the things that I think that we need to really kind of nail down is a concept here of prophets. Okay. So one of the difficulties that I've had in my time as a leader of a international ministry is the nuances of the apocryphal books coming into my congregation and being presented as truth. So what I'm going to do is just kind of basically the way that I probably want to go about this is I want to think in terms of what information do we have from the beginning of the flood prophecy that could really nail down a context of the flood coming because a prophet decided it, and that prophet was Noah. But the first to determine that this is the way in which we're going to make this adjustment is Enoch. Okay. So Hanok is actually his real name, which is where we also get the word Hanukkah, which means dedication. So when we look at Hebrew names as being a potential energy to be accepted or rejected as a choice to live the lifestyle according to the verb that they are named, we can see that Enoch was a walker. He walked. And there's a lot we could get into concerning walking, but I think there's another question that has walking in it. Because I thought we were going to address walking in this question, but it was never brought up. So, okay, so then we need to address walking really quick. So let's stick a pin in Enoch for a minute and let's talk about halakha from the point of view of Noah. So first of all, we have Noah as being defined as reflexively walking, right? Whether it be Noah, Elohim, they're one and the same in this specific little phrase, right? Because the reflexive causes them to do this. So we know that it was an Elohim and it was Noah, right? Most likely the Elohim being the object of the verb, but Noah is the object of the verb as well because it's reflexive. So the premise then is what is walking. And where we really, really, really get into this is when we realize that the word lach, lamed kaf, is literally the phrase staff in hand. And the premise is that a person of authority like a shepherd, remember, we're agricultural in this. Agriculture is the message from Yahweh or from the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into something perceivable to us on how to live. The Fibonacci sequence, the cycles, the golden ratio, the golden angle, all of those things are very, very powerful points of information that indicate that our Creator nuanced all elements of creation with subtle variations of the same pattern. And so as a result of that, we understand that it's agricultural in nature, right? And when I say in nature, what I mean, it's agricultural in system of operation. So then we accept that it is a shepherd walking, which means what? That's the destroyer of the predator watching, or the Yasha or the Yeshua operating as an authority So the shepherd, because remember, the ancient Hebrew nomads were not urban, they were pastoral. The shepherd with his staff, which represents his clan, who is his sheep, where he treads, so treads his sheep and thereby owns that land at that moment. So now all of a sudden, halakha is not about an interpretation on how to carry out Torah, but it's an act of dominion upon the land by spreading out, by moving and spreading your flock out upon that area that you're grazing. And at that moment of time, when you pitch your tent and you post your signet, that is your land. And if someone comes along and wants to encroach upon it, they're either going to war or they're going to covenant. So halakha is there where you tread with your staff. So here's Noah, which means contentment or relaxation. Noah is in a state of contentment and relaxation as walking with God, no, walking as God upon the land. Meaning what? He was trying to bring the light even at the last minute to those who he had identified as practicing senseless violence. And we'll get into the word violence here in a minute. But the premise is that now what he's doing, he's trying to tame, which means he was walking in the ruach, not the basar. He was walking in the higher self, not the ego, which means he was a high-level leader because he was trying to bring the light for the sake of the light, not for his own option of being bright. But he becomes an observer of the bad things. And so that word walking with God is totally off base. Walking as God upon the land. And that where he tread became holy. And the context of that, then and remember, holy means energized. The vibrations have been raised. The vibrations have been raised. The land's vibrations were raised by Noah. Now, getting back to Enoch, we have to go into last week's parasha, but we can look at that just briefly and look at Enoch because I'm going to show you something. When it says that Enoch walked with God, what do we see? I will show you. Let's see, I need to share. I need this to be more streamlined. That's why we need a video switcher for this. Okay, so here we have what? The Hithpael, right? Hithpael, sequential imperfect third person masculine singular. He will walk himself. Okay? And then, of course, we have the Vav, which is what? It's a time changer. It alters the he will to he did or perfect. Okay? So this whole conjugation here, let's see, I think it's probably going to be here in this section, tells us that it is going to be so that V is that reflexive vav that causes it to go from he will to he did. And so who Chanoch. Oh, there's our et ha-Elohim again. So now we have the exact same thing that was said about Noah, only in reverse. Okay. And so in principle, then we know that the same reflexive stuff is going on with Enoch. And look at this right here. That right there is going to be Methuselah. Methuselah or Methuselah, sorry, Methuselah, right? His son, Methuselah. And what does Methuselah mean? His death shall send. Okay?
Mhm. I personally believe that it was Methuselah's death that kept Noah from going in the first month. So the first month being Passover, right? But we know that you can have a Passover in the second month, which is why I think we see it was Methuselah's death that had the flood come in the second month, just like a Passover.
Okay. Interesting. So perhaps maybe the fact that the second Passover is an act of mercy.
Yes.
So we added one more month to the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you guys know that when you do the math, Methuselah dies. 7 days later, Noah goes into the ark. Methuselah's name lived out the message that the death of Methuselah would bring the judgment that Enoch had determined would be the way. A what? A mikvah, right? A mikvah, where all of the waters would be gathered into a place upon the entire earth. And there would be no more dry land. There would be no more shame. There would be no more exposure, right? And so Enoch is the one who determines a worldwide mikvah. And then Noah looks at the people and does the same thing that his grandfather had done, his great grandfather had done, because his father's name was Lamech, right? But the premise is that when Methuselah dies, Noah goes into the ark and boom, the flood comes. Now, we could get into all kinds of stuff about judgment and equal distribution of justice and all of the sky daddy arguments about a wrathful God. But instead, I want you to see how Noah, being the last of the blameless, which means what? People's minds had become so twisted they could no longer accept the covenant written upon their heart. They could no longer identify. Remember what Paul said? He said, if a Gentile, though not having the law, does the things of the law, then he shows himself to be a law unto himself, and that the law has been written upon his heart. His conscience accusing or defending him on the day of judgment, right? So now here's a Gentile, though not having the law, does the things of the law, therefore showing that the law has been written upon his heart, carrying out the Torah in such a way that his bringing of the light to the other Gentiles is rejected. No matter how we spin it, there seems to be a sentiment that they rejected the message of the ark, right? They rejected the message that a worldwide mikvah was coming. Now, however the supernatural worked with that situation, that all of the animals on the face of the earth, except those who rejected covenant, could join on the ark, means that something very special had to occur there. But what we do know, and this is important, Noah was blameless, and there's only one way to be blameless. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so we might become the righteousness of God. His bloodline was pure. That's not what it says. It says he was pure. Meaning what? He had not practiced senseless violence. He had not shed man's blood. Look at the covenant afterwards. Violence to animals, shedding of man's blood, consuming of man's blood, violence to the environment. Can you see where we have a context of halakha being a bringing of light into an environment of darkness, even though the flood was, as you could say, imminent? It brings an important point up, and actually a midrash question, which we could potentially pose here. Remember, I said we stuck a pin in Enoch for a moment, right? So let's stick a pin in this really quick. Did the flood have to happen? Judging from your silence, I think your response is I don't know. Because a lot of you are very, very good at answering yes or no, but you're not good at answering I don't know. Okay, so in principle, then, I'm going to just go off of that assumption that either A, you think that it is an unknowable thing, or B, that it's uncomfortable enough to be true, that the flood did not have to happen. Let me show you how this works. Yeshua died once and for all as a lamb being slain from the foundations of the earth, and as a lamb being the marriage component in Revelation 19. We can then find from those two verses combined that the lamb is that which was to be married, or is the bridegroom, and therefore the creator of the universe. But as a lamb slain from the foundations of the earth, we need to accept some very important points. Point number one, he was and is and will always be just one simple process: the intention of Torah, the intention of instruction, the intention of giving a path for people to walk to benefit the most from that behavior. Okay, when I say walk, what I mean is to practice. So that's number one. We know that retroactively affected the people at the time of the flood. And all they merely needed to do is accept that they were Elohim, that they were equal with God, and that was not a bad thing. But instead, their egos, and specifically Hasatan and the Yetzer Hara, which is the evil inclination, which I want you to understand, there's a good inclination as well. So don't for a second think that I am claiming original sin here or a sinful nature. That's all hogwash. That's all hogwash. But instead, the negation particle, the sovereignty of the bride to say no, is an inclination to not obey Torah from the sense of being sovereign, so that when she does say yes, she is able to say yes 100%. But that doesn't mean she doesn't ever need to say no in the first place. She just needed the sovereignty to say no. And so, in principle, her ability to say no is what actually makes her be able to choose it perfectly. And so now what we realize is he made him who knew no sin to become sin for those who were about to perish in the flood, that the righteous requirements of the Torah would be for those who do not walk according to the ego, but who walk according to the higher self or the Elohim within them, instead of dying in the flood. Because if there's anything I know for sure, it's that when you walk out Torah, you establish the protections of Torah. And when you do not walk out Torah, you remove the protections of Torah. And that is the only judgment that really comes. It's the difference between being in the clan when the marauders come and being outside the clan when the marauders come. You've been cast out. Here comes the marauders. There's no protection. It's a no-brainer here, people. It is not that hard to get your mind wrapped around the idea that if you are within the confines of grace, which is what? The surrounding wall of the clan, then you are in protection of the clan. And let me tell you, we're talking thousands of men, not 5 men in a circle of tents. We're talking about huge caravans of people camping and protecting themselves and protecting those they love and protecting those in covenant with them. And so you need to understand that the flood did not have to happen. People chose it to happen by not honoring the Torah that had been written upon their hearts. Look at Hosea chapter 12, verse 2. Adam violated Yahweh's covenant. What covenant? There was no covenant made except for the covenant of dominion. And so when we look at the covenant written upon our hearts, the new covenant, the idea that it's not written upon a scroll, it's not an oral tradition, but it is an intuition. Only the higher self contains that intuition. And you will often see the mystical rabbis, the rabbis who are teaching Kabbalah on TikTok, on YouTube, are not saying, oh, you know what, you shouldn't believe in Yeshua, you guys are out of line, you're out of order, da 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 da, you can't use our scriptures to prove you're Messiah, blah blah blah. They're going, learn how to bless, learn how to walk, learn how to be in covenant, listen to the spirit of Torah. Mind blown. Why are they talking about the spirit of Torah? Who spoke of the spirit of Torah? Paul. Rav Shaul spoke of the spirit of Torah. Son of Gamliel, right? Okay, so in principle then, and now moving and pulling the pin back out, did the flood need to happen? No, it did not. Not according to the God I serve anyways. And I will tell you, I got a pretty good challenge for all of your beliefs in a wrathful God. But in its simplicity, why send a prophet in the first place? The Isaiah, I believe it says, I will do nothing without revealing it to my prophets first. Why? Because a divine intervention is going to always result in an alteration of natural order processes. It's going to interrupt the flow. When we think about the concept that our God is okay with setting the world on fire, you are not serving the right God. You need to serve a God that says, I do not want this to happen. But the prophets, he says, not one word will fall to the ground of my prophets. If you're a prophet and you say a word, watch out. It's that same concept of what happened with Esther, where the Medes and the Persians had a rule that if a law was made by the five lords, that are not the five lords, if a law was made by the Medes, then it was permanent. You couldn't reverse it. And so they made a law that they could kill the Jews. And so Esther had to go in and get it altered, not changed, not taken away, but something added to it that the Jews were allowed to defend themselves. And so now these men are allowed to go arm up, turn into a militia, and handle their business, which they wouldn't have been allowed to do otherwise in Persian law. So you have a prophet speak something. The only way for it to not happen is there to be some sort of augmentation added to it. Because Yahweh says, I will not let one word of the prophets fall to the ground. So what was Isaiah doing? Yes, he was spreading the light. Yes, he was communicating. There was Isaiah was running around naked for 3 years.
Isaiah?
Or was it Ezekiel? I can't remember. Anyways, point being is this dude's running around naked for 3 years, right? On its face, on the Peshat level. He's running around buck naked, showing everybody his business. And they're like, this guy's got issues. Just leave him alone, you know. And all of a sudden he puts clothes back on and they're like, are you okay? And he's like, yep, I'm fine. Here's the message. Bloop. And it says, you will be led away naked into Babylon, right? Or something like that. Or maybe it was about Babylon. I don't know. Anyways, the point being, the prophet determines the outcome if the people are not willing to change. But that doesn't mean they can't change. And so here's the flood, a worldwide destruction, a cleansing, a mikvah, a moving from unclean, tomeh, to clean, tamim. Same root word, same parent root, a container of water. Moving from unclean to clean. Moving from shame and nakedness and exposure, dry land, to just mayim. A work in chaos. Now, here's the intrigue. Enoch determines that this is how it's going to happen. Methuselah is his sign. Noah chooses Enoch's path by reflexively walking, by spreading the light. And in the second month, done is done. Fun is fun and done is done. Right? That's it. Now, does that mean judgment has fallen upon the earth? No, a prophet, an Elohim, determined the course of how that was going to happen. Now, in the ancient belief system, there was a ball of ice around the earth. Scientists have found evidence of this in Io, where there is methane, which is a sign of life, being produced beneath the ice of Io, as if there's life there. We don't know what kind of life, but the point being is we have organic matter producing a gas. And the sentiment is that the origins of that gas is life. But what's my point? There's an ice shell around the entire planet. It's a moon, but it is what it is. So the premise then, in context, is what? We have a phenomenon under the right circumstances that could result in water covering the earth. That phenomenon in its simplicity, could have been a solar flare melting that ice, right? Could have been, relatively speaking, for all intents and purposes, it could have been an ice age where the waters rose very quickly as a result of a really powerful heat increase. Either way, however it works out, water that was not there would be there. And Enoch determined that that's how it was going to happen by naming his son Methuselah. And I believe Lamech is another name. I can't remember what Lamech means. I know that Lamech has something to do with the authority of water. It's Lamed, Kaf, with a mem in the middle. Okay. But then, yeah, I think that's how it is. Let me look real quick. In 5, Lamech. Yeah, it is. Lamed, mem, Kaf. Powerful. Yeah, powerful. 5th lineal descendant from Cain, husband of Ada and Zillah, and also father of Noah. Those are the 2 times that that name is used. Now, so now we've got walking taken care of. Read your question again.
Okay. Was the earth corrupt and filled with violence because it was being obedient to all flesh who desired violence and corruption on each other?
So the same thing that gives us free will is the same thing that gives us the ability to not honor the Torah written upon our hearts, the ego, Hasatan, right? The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which is basically the inclination to say no to the teaching and instruction, provision, and protection of the intensification of all power in the universe as a mechanism of source. Because in the end, that's all this is, right? All that's really going on here is a relationship with the source. The only thing between you and God is the light. And in general, it is you and the light of the creator. And that's it. And so in principle, then, if we want to look at that from a perspective of ego, then we understand that the ego is designed to be overcome. Let's look at this verse, though. This is going to be verse 9, correct?
Actually, this is verse 11, 12, and 13 of chapter 6. (11, 12, and 13).
Okay, let's go ahead and share this. And Elohim said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me. For the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So 2 words I want to look at here. The first one is the word filled. That is a word that really needs to be considered in this. Another one has to do with how before is used here. Another one is the word violence, and the last one is the word destruction. So the first thing that I want to look at is let's see. Elohim to Noah, Kates. Kates is the end. Kates. Interesting. Parent root. Katsats. To cut off. Yeah. Extremity. Let's see. Kal basar ba. The end of all flesh has come. Perfect. Has already entered in. Has entered in to my face. Well, we get into a lot there. Ki milah. They have filled, for they have filled the earth with Hamas, with violence.
Yep.
And from their face, from their face, because it is in the plural construct, the face of them. So the face, from the face of them. Okay, I'm going to need that other power chord. Oh, Hain, behold, or continued observance. Shachat, destroy, spoil, ruin. Oh, this is the rotting part that I wanted to get into, invariably. And so, what's the first place? What is the first thing I want to address here? I think the first thing I want to address is this word Kates. Kates. Strong's Concordance 7093. Okay, I'm going to look this up actually on my phone. In the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible. 7093. Of course it is. Pictograph is not known. The end of something, or to make an end by cutting off, which we already know. Some of the words here, we've got Kates, which is conclusion. We've got Ketsats, which is the end. We've got Ketsin, which is a ruler, one who rules within a border. Okay. And then we've got outer, the furthest. Okay. Is this what I think it is? To be cut off, to penetrate, sharp, knots, to make an end of something. Shear, kavat, katsav, to shear. Remains are sheared off, headed off. Okay, let me tell you where I think this goes. And let's see if that is a legitimate thing here. Uh-oh. Okay. The kolf is the drawing. Oh, okay. The kolf is a circle with a line through it. Okay. And it represents the sun at the horizon or the condensation or gathering of light. The tzadeh is actually the drawing of a man lying down, which we could say then there's a condensation or a gathering of men lying down. What would that be? That would be an ambush, right? Because that word or that tzadeh is a man lying down in wait, right? Not lying down in peace, but lying down in wait. And a lot of times the tzadeh is a word that represents dissension or separation or distribution. The tzadeh is more about a man. For example, the word chrutz itself, chrutz, resh tzadeh, is the word for run. And interestingly enough, has to do with the concept of it has to do with the concept of escaping from a pursuer. Okay. And so that sadi chesh is the word for run in the sense of running and seeking refuge from something. Now, at the same time, that word running doubles for the word messenger. In fact, if you say that you desire something, so you're moving towards it quickly, and also has the concept of the desire of a king. For example, if I say that I want to sit on a throne, I'd say, Ani chratzon kiseh, right? I want to sit upon the chair. And so in principle, then the resh tzadeh indicates a fleeing from a pursuer. So the tzadeh could be hiding, but it's either hiding to ambush or hiding from a predator or hiding from a pursuer. And so Kof tzadeh together is men lying in wait. And so in principle, this is kind of indicating, it says that it is an extremity or it is a border. But what I want you to think about is that it is a line before the battle. And so the way that this goes is that these men are lying in wait behind the enemy line, right behind the enemy line. And so that's the border of the territory. Anything on the other side of that line is fair game, right? So that's where we get the word border or extremity. But here's how I want you to think about it, is that the flood or the waters were lying in wait. So this is not end, but instead is a lying in wait has entered in. An ambush has entered in. Let's take a look at the rest of this verse. And I don't know whether or not I'm going to get whether we're going to get this tablet to continue charging or not. Verse 13, the end of all flesh. What is flesh? Ego has come before me, right? This is Elohim speaking to Noah. The end of all flesh has come before me. Doesn't say Yahweh Elohim. It says Elohim. And so I know we could get into some controversy because just like in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and earth, not Yahweh Elohim. But then we see the Lord God form Adam out of the dust of the ground, right? There's a lot we could get into there. Anyways, Elohim said to Noah, the end of all ego has come before me. That's not what it says. It says has come into my face. Let's talk about face for a minute. Do you guys know in Kabbalah that there's a belief that the beard of a man is actually a likeness of the intensification of all power in the universe, because the place where the energy of intelligence occurs is so concentrated with light that it actually shoots out the sides of it in a manner similar to a beard shooting out the side of the face. So in a mystical sense, we could identify that when it says that is come to my face. However, we also need to look at the lamed not as the word to, but for the sake of. Meaning what? The ambush has entered in for the sake of my face, right? Very different wording. But the word Hamas being presented here is the word for violence. The word Hamas is the word for violence here, and it says that the earth is filled with violence. But let's see if that's actually how it reads in the Hebrew. Let me go ahead and share this with you again. And let's take a look at this, because here we go again. I mean, even JPS Tanakh is going to read this way, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the truth of what it's saying when we use the ancient pictographic definitions. Okay, so it's that word malah. And I can tell you that word malah is going to be coming from the concept of filling, but not how you would think. Let's see, that's Strong's Concordance number 4390. And again, I don't have the lexicon. I don't think I do anyways. I don't have the lexicon on this tablet. This actually is this is actually Renee's tablet. I don't have it. So I'll go ahead and type that into my phone here and describe to you what we are looking at. 4390. I think next time we will broadcast from this and use that as our reference. Since this has the lexicons on it and stuff. Okay. 4390 is going to come to the parent root mim lamed. So what are we doing? We're dropping the aleph. This is a child root. We're dropping the aleph. And what it says is there's no definition for the pictograph. We'll get there. A chain of words blended together to form sentences is the concept of a continuation of segments which fill the whole. Okay? So in principle, the way that I want you to think about milah has to do with the cyclical, and this means we definitely need to get into the rainbow later on today. However, what I want to go ahead and do is say that for now, we're just going to look at the pictograph in terms of that mim lamed. And let me see what I can do here. Let me see if I've got freeform. I do have freeform. Okay. So let's go ahead and draw a picture here of what we've got going on in terms of freeform. I don't think I've ever used the pencil on this one. Okay, here we go. This is not letting me draw here. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and use the other tablet to do this. So we'll get out of this one. Sorry, still working out the technicalities for these midrashes. Share screen. And what we're going to do is look at the ancient pictographs. So we've got Mim, Lamed, Aleph. So the actual parent root is going to be this, and it's going to be the drawing of water and the drawing of the shepherd's crook. So two things. Number one, the drawing of water is in the rightmost position, which is the position of honor. And since it's the position of honor, it augments through the delegation or the jurisdiction of the other letter. The other letter gives it permission to command it, so to speak, by putting it in the position of honor. Therefore, the mim is going to augment the lamed, which is chaos authority, or chaos moves toward authority. Let me take a look here. Looks like we're not seeing the screen on YouTube. Might just be catching up though. It appears as though it's not appearing on YouTube correctly. Tell you what, let's take a break. It's 1:36. Let's take a break. I'll get some food and we will we'll move forward here afterwards.